The word psychopath, it probably brings a really specific and, let's be honest, pretty scary image to mind. But what if I told you that our entire popular understanding of what that means might be based on a fundamental scientific mistake? Let's dig into what the science actually says.
So when you picture a psychopath, what's the first thing that really jumps out at you? Is it that charming, manipulative personality? Or is it the violent criminal acts? Turns out that exact question is right at the heart of a massive debate in psychology.
This might come as a shock, but yeah, the vast majority of people with psychopathic traits are not violent criminals. They're not in prison, which of course brings up a really important question. If that's true, where in the world did we get our modern image of the criminal psychopath?
Okay, let's pull that myth apart. If most people with these traits aren't violent, why is that our default picture? Well, the answer, believe it or not, isn't really in the disorder itself, but in the tool that we invented to try and measure it.
So this is where the trouble starts. See, this one super influential checklist comes along, and it becomes known as the gold standard for research. But, and this is the absolute key detail, it was created entirely within prison walls. I mean, they built it by interviewing convicted criminals and studying their records. Just think about that for a second. By its very definition, the tool was designed using a group of people who are already criminals.
And right there, that's where you see this fundamental mix-up happen. We started confusing the tool for measurement with the actual concept it was supposed to be measuring. And as we're about to see, those two things are not the same thing at all.
Let's start with the original idea, the concept itself. The original idea of psychopathy had basically nothing to do with crime. It was defined as a personality disorder, and it focused on these core traits you can see right here. Things like being callous, totally egocentric, and just not feeling any remorse. It's about who a person is, deep down, not necessarily what they've done. Now let's look at the tool, that checklist called the PCLR. Because it was developed inside prisons, it was designed from the very beginning to assess these traits in people who were, you guessed it, already criminals. So it naturally baked in this huge focus on antisocial and criminal behaviors. This right here makes the distinction perfectly clear. I mean, we all get that an IQ test score isn't the same thing as intelligence, right? It's just a tool we use to try and measure it. Well, it's the exact same thing here. A score on the PCLR checklist isn't psychopathy. It's just one specific tool designed to assess some of its signs.
So this brings us right to the core of the conflict, and it plays out in these two competing models for how to even define the disorder. This is where the scientific debate gets really, really interesting.
I mean, the person who literally wrote the book on the modern concept of psychopathy, Hervey Cleckley, he could not have been more clear on this. As he wrote, major crimes should be seen as the exception, not the rule. For him, the heart of the disorder was this deep emotional deficit, not just a list of illegal things someone did.
Okay, this slide boils the entire debate down into two models. Just take a look at Model A on the left. This is the model that comes from that PCLR tool. It says personality plus crime equals psychopathy. They're all bundled together. But Model B argues something completely different. It says the personality is the core disorder, and that disorder might lead to crime. In this view, crime is just a potential outcome, It's not a defining ingredient. So why does any of this even matter? Well, because that PCLR tool, and the model it's based on, became incredibly popular for one big reason. It's really, really good at predicting if an offender is going to commit another crime. But there's a huge catch. So why is it so good at predicting crime? Well, as this chart shows, when researchers broke the tool down, they found something fascinating. The vast majority of its predictive power comes from the parts that measure past antisocial behavior. The core personality traits, on their own, are actually pretty weak predictors of future crime.
And this creates a perfect circle, a perfectly circular argument. We're using a tool that heavily weighs past criminal behavior to predict future criminal behavior. Now, it's not wrong. I mean, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, but it tells us basically nothing about the underlying personality disorder itself. This quote just captures that circular logic so perfectly. Why did he do these awful things? Well, because he's a psychopath. Okay, and how do you know he's a psychopath? Well, because he did those awful things. You see, it's a perfect loop that doesn't actually explain a single thing.
So where do we go from here? How do we find a clearer path forward and finally separate the scientific goal of, understanding a personality disorder from the practical but totally separate task of predicting risk?
The researchers behind our source material propose a really clear three-step solution. First, they say we need an actual theory for how personality and crime are linked, not just saying that they are. Second, we need to prioritize the underlying causes, like biology, over just listing off behaviors. And finally, and this is the big one, we have to break that circular logic by moving beyond a single tool that uses crime to define a disorder that includes crime. Ultimately, it all comes down to this. We have to finally accept that understanding a really complex personality disorder is just not the same thing as predicting a person's risk of violence. The first one is a goal for science. The second is a goal for public safety. They are both incredibly important, but we have to stop pretending they're the same job.
And all of this leaves us with a final and pretty provocative question. If we finally separate psychopathy from criminality, we have to start asking, how many of these so-called successful psychopaths are really out there? How many snakes in suits are thriving in boardrooms or in government or even in our own communities, all without ever breaking a single law?